I want to read to you the same story twice. And once I'm done reading both, I want you to type in the comments how you think they're different. But before I begin, I want to ask that you stick around, don't click off the video until I finish reading both stories and you really think about how they're different. I think you're going to find value in where I'm going with this. And I promise you, it connects with what is currently going on with Emma Grede and her statement around working from home. Story 1. My name is Irresponsibility. I'm 46 years old, and I'm from the Holly Grove neighborhood of New Orleans. I grew up in a traditional New Orleans shotgun home. Me and my mama on one side, my grandma and my uncle on the other side. My childhood home was raggedy as fuck and in dire need of repairs. It leaned on one side. I seldom, if ever, brought anybody home with me because I was just that embarrassed. At the height of my teenage years, New Orleans was the murder capital. In my 8th grade year, New Orleans had almost 450 homicides. The reason a lot of these murders happened was because of poverty, the crack epidemic, people living in dire straits, children not having what I've learned are third spaces, or adults pouring into them because often the adults around them were also trying to survive. My mom was a divorced single parent. My mama worked nights. I met my father one time. I was around 2 or 3. I have never seen him before or after that, except for this one picture. I didn't hit 6 figures until 2020. I was 41 in 2020. I have never made 6 figures at any job where I wasn't my own boss. I scoffed at having roommates until I moved to New York City in 2013. It took me 6 years of renting rooms to finally get my own apartment again. I moved away from New York to DC in 2021. Currently, I'm technically homeless. 30% of the things I own are in my car, and the other 70% are in a friend's basement in North Carolina. I do not own a bed. I do not own a sofa. I do not own any big furniture. I don't even own a set of real utensils. Story number 2. My name is Irresponsibility. I'm 46 years old. I'm from the Holly Grove neighborhood of New Orleans. I grew up in a traditional New Orleans shotgun home. Me and my mama on one side, my grandma and my uncle on the other side. My childhood home was raggedy as fuck and in dire need of repairs. I seldom, if ever, brought anyone home with me because I was just that embarrassed. I have never gone to public school. We inherited my childhood home from my Uncle Willie, who died when I was 2. The money that would be spent on living in a less raggedy home or in a more affluent neighborhood was spent on things like my private school tuition, church vacations, the occasional in-style clothing item, my monthly allowance, the times my mama treated herself to things, when my mama helped my grandma and my uncle out financially, stuff like that. About 5 years ago, I had my childhood home torn down to avoid the city taking it from us. I was able to avoid paying the city of New Orleans $30,000 for a city contractor to tear it down because I was able to take $10,000 out of my own savings and do it out of pocket. At the height of my teenage years, New Orleans was the murder capital. In my 8th grade year, New Orleans had almost 450 homicides. The reason a lot of these murders happened was because of poverty, the crack epidemic, people living in dire straits, children not having third spaces, or adults pouring into them because often the adults around them were also trying to survive. My mother was a divorced single parent. I grew up in a community of people who held space when my mama or my grandma were unavailable. My grandma and my uncle lived right next door. All I had to do was walk across the porch and I was at my grandma's house. My godmother, who has 4 children, also had 3 sisters who took care of me. I have countless cousins. I had so many people besides my mom available to take care of me that one day I asked my mama how she'd feel if I stopped saying she was a single mom. Initially, Patricia was very offended. But when I explained my logic to her, she agreed. And she even said, "That's a really noble way of putting that." My mom worked nights as a nurse shift supervisor, and she retired in 2005, the same year of Hurricane Katrina. My mother has a college degree. So did my grandmother. So did her sister, my great aunt. So did the neighbor next door. So did the neighbor next door to her. So did the neighbor across the street. So did my godmom. I had private health insurance growing up. My mother took out loans for my college education. I took out loans for graduate school. I went to the #1 HBCU in the country. School has always been easy for me, not because I'm smarter than those it was not easy for, but because education has always come in the form of audio-visual learning, and I absorb information audio and visually naturally well. I also speak English fluently. I have never had to worry about language barriers because I live in a country where the primary language is the language I'm fluent in. I'm also able-bodied, so I never have to worry about physical buildings as barriers for me entering them. I have full use of my limbs and my cognition. I have no health concerns, and I'm conventionally attractive. I met my father once. I was around 2 or 3. I have never seen him before or after that except for one picture. My mother and father were married. His name is on my birth certificate. However, my mother has sole custody of me. She has never had to worry about needing his signature in order for me to get any government documents. She had no concern about him obstructing her parenting of me. I didn't hit 6 figures until 2020. I was 41 in 2020. I have never made 6 figures at any job where I wasn't my own boss. Although I didn't make six figures before that, I have an undergraduate degree from the #1 HBCU in the country, and I have 2 graduate degrees from a pretty prominent private university in New Orleans. I own stock in multiple companies. All that to say, I have a high amount of social capital. I scoffed at having roommates until I moved to New York City in 2013. It took me 6 years of renting rooms to finally get my own apartment again. I moved away from New York in 2021 to DC. Before moving to New York, I had never had a roommate, except for 2 years of undergrad. I had my own bedroom growing up. I'm an only child. I grew up with books on top of books in my home, including encyclopedias. I had a typewriter. My mother helped me with my homework very often. She seemed to especially like it when I had book reports, which makes sense because she is a bibliophile. My mother, who I call Jesus #2, speaks English fluently as well. My mother is able-bodied. My mother's mind at almost 80 years old is sharp as a tack. My mother is conventionally attractive. My mother has a college degree, an HBCU degree at that. My home life was exceptionally stable and consistent, despite the frequent turmoil of my neighborhood. We owned our home. It has been in our family for 5 generations. My mother is the most reliable and consistent person ever in my life. She is currently 79 years old and lives in Southwest Atlanta. Currently, I'm technically homeless. 30% of the things I own are in my car, and the other 70% are in a friend's basement in North Carolina. I don't own a bed. I don't own a sofa. I don't even own any big furniture. I don't own a set of utensils. I chose to move out of the most stunning home I've ever lived in. And the lease of that home was in my name and my name alone. I left DC so that I could figure out what I'm doing next with my life. I lived in the same apartment for 4 years as a regular paying high-ass DC prices tenant. I now travel the country using a global app called Trusted House Sitters, where I provide pet and house sitting services for upper-class families when they travel. Every home I've been in has been immaculate, except for one. A recent one sat smack dab on a golf course. And I have friends across the globe. And some of my friends who live across this country have extra homes, who have given me their keys and just said, go when you need to. Just let me know when you'll be there. All of those friends have a minimum of a college degree. Remember when I told y'all I have a shit ton of social capital? This gives me access to people with multiple homes. But more than that, it allows what I'm doing right now to be seen as adventurous. No one calls me a hobosexual. Nobody views me as a vagabond or lazy or shiftless. Many people, most people are inspired by the fact that I have just given up my traditional life in DC for this life of adventure. The fact that I don't have a home in my name is a chosen experience. Because of my social capital, that allows me to be able to take a leap as wide as the one I'm taking and not worry or fear the traditional experience of homelessness. I have never slept in my car. I couldn't tell you where any shelters are. I actually have experienced some of the most beautiful homes of my life since leaving my traditional life in DC. It also helps that I have no children to consider. Now, how did these stories differ? I give you a hint. The stories were identical, except story 2 had additional elements. So everything in story 1 was in story 2, but everything in story 2 wasn't in story 1. And I did that on purpose. The first story is what I call my lack narrative or my poverty narrative. It's the story I have always used when I needed scholarships, when I needed sponsorships, when I needed something from an individual or an institution that demands my story of lack. If you are anything like me, it's the first story you were taught to write about yourself. It's the story that most of us are trained to tell, our downtrodden story, the one that garners sympathy, the one that makes people reach in their pockets and fund our dreams or our education, you know, that kind of thing. But the second story you heard is a far more complete story, but it's one I didn't write for the first time until I was an adult. It's one closer to a liberation story, a more true story, a far more complete and honest depiction of how I actually walk through the world every day as me. But what's interesting is that everything you heard in both stories are true. As a Black person, I'm clear that we, like Emma Grede, are well oiled to spew story number 1. But story number 2 requires far more introspection, more honesty, and more vulnerability, because it doesn't garner as much sympathy, and it counters the way Black people are viewed societally and how some of us are conditioned to view even ourselves. My biggest criticism of Emma Grede's recent comments on Baby, This Is KeKe Palmer is that they were full of incomplete truths. And incomplete truths cause a shit ton of harm. If you are still here, thank you. Stick around because I'm not done. But first, let me introduce myself in case there are those of you who don't know me. I'm the Ignant intellectual. My birth certificate says Irandrian. I'm the bridge between the hood and the ivory tower. But more than that, I'm a writer and a storyteller. On this channel, my goal is to create a space for us to think about our thoughts. I do that by talking about any and everything. But what I talk about is always via one of 3 lenses. First, cultural autopsies. Second, framework drops. And third, bridge videos. Now, what the hell are those? Cultural autopsies are where I do what autopsies do. I dissect public conversations and uncover the deeper things at play. Interviews, moments, trends, controversies. Cultural autopsies go beneath the surface and take the larger conversations and look at what's really underneath a person, a moment, or a trend. Then framework drops. Framework drops offer tools for thinking more deeply about what you're living through. They give you tools to think with. Because if you like me, you sometimes feel and think that some shit just ain't right, but you don't always have the tools or the language to articulate why some shit just ain't right. And then bridge videos connect things people usually keep separate and show how they actually are related. I'm interested in what happens when we put two things in conversation that don't usually get discussed together, like prostitution and spirituality, or being a sex worker and a Christian, or being transgender and having a relationship with God. These videos are about naming the connection, the tension, and the meaning of that sometimes messy middle. This video is a cultural autopsy. As with all of my videos, you don't have to agree with me, but at least know why you think what you think, especially before you get in my comments disagreeing with me. Now, I know the stuff I talk about can bring about a lot of different reactions, and I actually don't expect everybody to agree with me. So you get to disagree with me, but there are rules of engagement. Oh, you thought this was a democracy? No, ma'am, Pam. Rule of engagement number 1, you must have watched the video completely in order to disagree with me. I will not be entertaining. I ain't watched the whole thing, but as people, no. And trust me, I'm gonna ask you in the comments, did you watch the whole video? And honestly, the main reason for this is that often the things that people disagree with are things that I wrestle with in the video. Number 2, you must have thought about your thoughts and why you disagree. The entire channel is about thinking about your thoughts. So if you have a thought, cool, I wanna know your thought. If you haven't thought about your thought, shh. And lastly, use moments of discomfort to inquire deeper. Again, I know the stuff I talk about can bring about a lot of different emotions and reactions. So at minimum, watch the whole video. Think about your thoughts before jumping in the comments with certain heated responses. And lastly, use any moments of discomfort to go inward and see why you might feel uncomfortable. So what did Emma Grede even say? I really wish I could just put the video clip in, but YouTube loves a good old copyright strike. So y'all gonna just have to deal with me reading to you what Emma Grede said. Emma actually has said a lot of things, but what has the internet ablaze right now is a specific comment that she made on KeKe Palmer's podcast, Baby, This Is KeKe Palmer. It is an episode that aired very recently, like 3 days ago, April 14th. And in listening to this part of the podcast many times to prep for this video, I saw 2 big themes emerging. The first one is what story someone tells, and 2, whether they're even talking to me. The former demands listening, and the latter demands discernment. For context, Emma's specific comment that got the internet ablaze was about working from home, and it was situated inside of a new book she wrote. To be clear, she began this part of her comment with the following. One of the key reasons I wrote this book was because I wanted people to understand some of the comments I've made. Because I'm very honest, I'm very truthful, and I do say what is my truth. The important thing to know here is I'm not an expert on podcasts telling you what 1, 2, 3 things I can do. I'm showing you the way it has worked for me. And I'm honest about those things. And what I think is that work from home culture is a career killer for women. Baby, that sentence, that's what the people mad about on the internet. When she said, and what I think is that work from home culture is a career killer for women. They mad. She continued on with, and let me explain to you why. Remembering I have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of women that work for me. Now, what is happening is that we talk about this sort of upside to Zoom culture, but none of the rigidity of it. And no one will really tell you, but careers require proximity and visibility. You want a pay raise? You want the next promotion? You want the big corner office? Guess what? You need to be there. You might not want to hear it because it might be comfortable in your living room, but the facts are the facts. And I'm not here to sugarcoat information or load women up with toxic positivity. It's eroding the potential for women to be successful. Period. End of. Your boss won't tell you that, but the truth is the truth. It just is. If you're not there, you're not in the room. There's going to be somebody else who is. And guess what? They will get that opportunity over you. It's not about whether these things are true or properly understood or whether they're right, quite frankly. Now, Emma goes on to say that we live in a world where we believe we can just listen our way into success. No, she says ambition has to find you working, and work is just work. Here's the thing. Emma wasn't wrong in her interview. Emma wasn't right in her interview. In my opinion, the questions are, who was Emma talking to? Was Emma talking to me? Was Emma talking to you? Emma didn't even misspeak necessarily, not if who you are who she was talking to. Let's go back to something she said. She said, you want a pay raise? You want the next promotion? You want the big corner office? Guess what? You need to be there. If that's not you, she's not talking to you. Pay raise, yes. If you don't want the big corner office, if you are not preoccupied with the next promotion, that's not who she's talking to. Emma Grede has said more than once that work-life balance is an employee's personal responsibility, not the employer's, stating that she views it as a red flag when candidates ask about it in interviews. She believes achieving high-level success requires intense effort, arguing that those seeking top roles should not expect traditional balance. If you are not seeking a top role, she's also not talking to you. It is important to understand that Emma Grede is talking to a particular person. She is not talking to people who have been doing work from home work. She's not talking to people who are not climbing the traditional ladder. She's not talking to those people. And that's what I want to spend some time on, because what I find is that many of us are upset about Emma's subtext, what she didn't say when she said what she said, which is what really got people pissed the hell off. But I'm not sure they fully see it that way. And this framing is what I'd like to spend some time on with this video. Because once you understand this, it saves you a lot of energy when it comes to Emma Grede's comments on KeKe Palmer's podcast. For starters, I didn't hear Emma once acknowledge any of the plethora of unearned structural advantages that she has. She's what I call a bootstrap girly, meaning pull yourself up by your bootstraps. If you don't succeed, you didn't work hard enough, you didn't bend enough, you didn't flex enough, you didn't grind enough. I'm willing to bet that Emma Grede, whether she admits it or not, believes in meritocracy. But let's go back and define something. When I say unearned structural advantage, that's a more heady way of saying privilege. And by unearned, I don't mean we didn't work hard for what we have. By unearned, I mean that we happen to live in a world that values that thing more than it doesn't. And by virtue of just existing societal values, we benefit from it. Like my story number 2. Let's take education. Sure, we work for our degrees, but we also live in a society that places higher value on degrees than no degrees. We didn't create that. We simply benefit from it. Emma, like most people, is excellent at telling story number 1, the downtrodden story, the story that leaves out the structural advantages, the story that frames our life and our narratives in a particular way. During her KeKe Palmer interview, Emma described herself as a girl who had very little education and very little access in the beginning. She then says, because Emma said stuff that was more than just about this work from home thing on their podcast episode, just to be clear. Then she says it becomes your responsibility to be the change, to be the shift. I find that that's a very common conclusion drawn by people on both ends of the class poles. Those who have very little education and very little access, and those who have a lot of education and a lot of access. The idea of it being their responsibility to be the change. But Emma said something that I found interesting. She said that she realized that people were asking her questions that she had the answer for, so she provided access to them. And to that I call cap, Emma, lies, girl, lies. More specifically, why I say lies is because she's probably sanitizing and telling incomplete truths, which is what my whole thing is. Incomplete truths. Emma likely could not look me in my face and say that she has upped her access equally to everybody who don't have access. That's just not how someone who becomes valued at $400 million works. She mentioned also in that podcast that she desires 1 million little Emmas, 1 million little girls who on paper you wouldn't think could do it, but they can because they've been given the opportunity, information, and access. She says it's not about who can, but who gets to. Emma, girl, what do those little Emmas look like? Are they cute? Are they deeply melanated with oversized features and really nappy ass hair? Are they little kids who have certain accents? Are they Black American hood girls, Emma? Because Emma, your accent is the top tier, highest brow accent in the world. So let's talk about this. Because on the surface, people are saying Emma Grede is tone deaf. Emma Grede is attached. Emma Grede is not considering people who don't desire to climb the corporate ladder. Emma Grede, Emma Grede, Emma Grede. On the surface, I do see what people are talking about. But my main thought is really simple, but complex. Emma Grede is wedded to story number 1. She is wedded to the story that she was raised by a single mother in a working class neighborhood in East London. She started working at a young age, including newspaper delivery at age 12. But here's the error in that marriage. When you are wedded to your trauma story, your poverty narrative, your story of lack, it absolves you of being accountable to all the ways you have unearned structural advantages. If I walked around only talking about my mama was a single mama, I grew up in Holly Grove, I never met my daddy, if that was my story, that is hugely irresponsible. As somebody who reads people's stories and gets really frustrated a lot of times, like I was reading, I can't remember her name, the lady that was married to Bob Johnson, the man who sold BET. And it was just this valiant story of the woman who was married to Bob Johnson, who lost a child and he cheated on her and she left and went to move to Virginia and she opened the Salamander Resorts and she climbed and she didn't let a divorce hinder her, blah, blah, blah. So I'm reading this story and you can feel the tide swell and all that. And I'm like, she's light-skinned, she's conventionally attractive, she's able-bodied, she speaks English and all of these things. And I'm like, the incomplete stories we tell about ourselves that others tell about us, it is underestimated how impactful they are in our larger narrative. I personally actually don't want to be known for the valiant, I rose out of the ashes of Holly Grove and I made it. And I often think about how, for me and for people like Emma, You have to leave home to be successful. You have to leave all that you know, all the people you know, all the nooks and crannies of culture that you know. Success means leaving all that you know. That's not success. That actually feels like utter gutter bullshit. I want the choice to not live at home, but I don't want it to because I have to leave home to be successful. So we got to think about these stories we tell about ourselves. But let me get back to Emma Grede, because I think it's more than just be mad about Emma Grede saying work from home culture is killing the careers of women. That should be a concern, but it should be, you got to get underneath so many other layers about what sponsors that thought of hers, what that thought is rooted in. So back to unearned structural advantage. Again, when I say unearned structural advantage, that's a more heady way of saying privilege. I don't mean you don't work for your degrees. I don't mean you don't work hard. First of all, this being wedded to work hard, baby. I don't know if I work hard no more. I work smart as fuck. But y'all can have this toil shit, this striving, this long suffering shit. Y'all can have that. I have spoken about long suffering more than once on this channel. But some of the things that trouble me about Emma Grede's way of telling her story, because I've seen her tell her story, snippets of it more than once. I've watched snippets of her podcast. I've seen her on other people's podcasts. I have not heard Emma one time acknowledge being conventionally attractive. In other words, pretty privilege. Pretty privilege is an unearned structural advantage in this world. I vividly remember my first W-2 job, which is how I became a certified pharmacy tech. I used to work in a mom and pop pharmacy in New Orleans. And I remember somebody came in and filled out an application. Back then, there wasn't no internet, child. It was a paper application. And I ran the application up to Mr. Castellone upstairs, the owner of Castellone Pharmacy, still there on Oak Street. He looked me in my face and said, are they attractive? And I was like, not to me. I was honest. He shredded the application. That is an interpersonal and an individual example of a larger system called pretty privilege as a system. I don't hear Emma acknowledging that. Now, I want to say this. When I start talking about the things that I don't hear, I could imagine if I was saying it to her face, she would yeah me. But what I'm talking about is things that need to be deeply woven into our internal narratives about ourselves. The moment we think I was raised by a single mom, if that's not immediately followed up with, but I had a shit ton of community that helped raise me, that's the point. If your trauma porn and your trauma narrative, if your brain hasn't evolved to the point of quickly adding nuance to that, I don't hear nuance in Emma Grede's story. So I don't hear her acknowledging her pretty privilege. Now, Emma Grede's racialization and ethnicity is that of what we would call the ups, if we look at it as the ups or the downs. She's a biracial black woman. She has a Jamaican Trinidadian daddy and a white English mom, and she identifies as a black woman. Emma Grede sits within blackness in a very different way than a lot of the people that's mad at Emma Grede online. Emma Grede navigates this world as a black woman very differently than me, very differently than as a bearded girl, very differently than when I asked, when you say you up your access, very differently than the hood girls coming from Bed-Stuy, the hood girls coming from New Orleans, or the hood girls coming from Atlanta or Detroit, Oakland, or wherever these girls at. Emma Grede is British, who lives in Los Angeles, born in the UK. That's very different. I also don't hear Emma Grede acknowledge something that's often overlooked. She is smack dab in the middle of her peak earning years. Emma Grede is not being discriminated against structurally, institutionally, interpersonally because of her age, because she's too young or she's too old. She is, like me, smack dab in the middle of her peak earning years. She is worth $400 million right now. They're going to be talking about Emma Grede in a very different way when she's 70, because she earned her money in her peak earning years. She's not telling the story, I started late and I didn't earn my money until I was 60 and 70. No, baby. Peak earning years. That is a structural advantage around this conversation of ageism. Connected to conventional attractiveness, Emma Grede is thin. Emma Grede ain't fat. Emma Grede don't worry about the system of fat phobia. Emma Grede don't go to the doctor, whether that's in the UK or Los Angeles, and have a doctor tell her that every sickness she have, everything she feel is because she fat. Emma Grede has conventional attractiveness mixed with thin privilege. Again, I feel like if I was telling her to her face, she would be like, yeah, of course, yeah. Good American is a full body inclusive company. We thought about that when we launched Skims. First of all, I think they go up to a good old 5X. I'm not fat, and I want to preface with that, but fully inclusive, or whatever the language is of that website. To me, that would demand that you make everything tailor-made. I don't think it's okay for you to even use that terminology, and you have a stopping point of your sizes. Even if it's 5X, that stopping point means you're not fully inclusive. If people got to go to the tail because it's too long, use some other language because that's not fully inclusive. Emma Grede also is straight. I think she got some kids and a husband, child. Emma Grede also conforms to gender norms. She is cisgender. She is heterosexual. She has a home, maybe multiple homes, meaning she is not unhoused. And being unhoused is a huge structural disadvantage. See, it's one thing. It's like when I meet people who say they parents kicked them out at 15 or 14 only to learn that they went to boarding school. You know, that's how I feel. That's how I feel. It'd be like the lies of omission piss me off way more than the lies of commission. Lie to my face, but baby, when you leave shit out the story, and that's what I mean by story 1 versus story 2, I can tell story 1 and never tell story 2. But to me, my story number 1 is a bold-faced lie, although everything in it is true. But it is a story of omission. We have to be more responsible with how we tell our own stories, because then we'd be looking wild out here on KeKe Palmer's podcast talking about women who work from home are robbing themselves or whatever. I butchered it, but and I want to explain why I feel this way. How you tell your story, how you tell one part of your story predicts. It's almost like a predictive model for how you view yourself, how you view others, how you tell your full story. If you say, my mom is a single mama, I grew up poor in London, I had to sell newspapers at 12. And you leave out other components of the story to make it a fuller story, a more complete story, a story that might actually make you look less poor or less dire. If you do not just automatically nuance your story, you essentially are a liar. You essentially are a liar. And that is a problem. Emma Grede is able-bodied. And I don't think we have to walk through the world telling our story in a checklist. But we tell our poverty story in a checklist too. We're just really used to telling our trauma story that we don't even realize we're telling it in a checklist. When somebody rattles off, my mom was a single mom, I grew up poor in East London, I had to sell newspapers at 12, baby, that's a checklist. So how about you complicate the checklist? How about you nuance the checklist? How about you make the checklist more robust? Emma Grede seems to be deemed healthy. And one that we gotta honor, Emma Grede not only speaks English, she speaks the King's English. The British accent is the highest brow accent on the planet. The deep Southern accent of the United States is the lowest brow accent on the planet. You can see, there's a beautiful book, one of my favorite, I be challenging these white sociological canon white people, but Pierre Bourdieu authored a book called Distinctions. And it's a thick, probably 1,000+ pages, but it goes through every facet of society. And it tiers things that we overlook, like highbrow sports. It separates society by all its spheres. And it talks about accents. And the British accent is bar none. And when we say highbrow, it is what is conferred upon people who speak the King's English unearned. Just by simply having a British accent, people confer things on you, like that you're more intelligent, that you're a better worker, that you probably bring more to the team, that you're a better partner, whether that's at work, in relationships. When we talk about highbrow, lowbrow, and the spectrum of that, we're talking about the things that are conferred upon a person just by the fact that they have certain accents, and the things that are removed by the fact that a person might have a deep South accent. You could have a person from the U.S. South. Let's take the poorest state, Mississippi, a thick Mississippi accent, and put them next to a person with a British accent. Same language, different dialects. It's going to be assumed that the person from Mississippi is lazier, is less intelligent, is less of a hard worker. That predicts access to things in the world. People are sometimes just given things because of their accent. I know for a fact I just been given shit because of how I look. Being the kid back in the day that was cute as a button, I know I got access that some of the kids who was not as cute just didn't get. Don't mean I was smarter than them. It was assumed I was smarter than them. And when you mix all of your areas of unearned structural advantage together to collide upon one person, that's a lot of privilege, or a lot of lack of privilege. But it doesn't speak to the core innate value of a person. They got a lot of people that's not cute, but smarter than people that's cute. It is not, there's research that shows people are less incarcerated based on skin tone. If you go to prisons today, you are more likely to find darker skinned people That's wild. That's wild. That people deemed more conventionally attractive are more likely to get a job. This is why the Emma Grede interview had me annoyed. Not because she was talking specifically about work from home culture is killing the careers of women. Because Emma Grede was talking to a particular woman. And if you're not that particular, a lot of y'all out there mad about what Emma Grede said, and you don't even want to climb a corporate ladder, but you're just mad because you just on autopilot mad. You have to decide whether a person has your crayons and your time. And I'm not necessarily talking about Emma right now, but have you ever heard somebody say something so egregious that who said it? I don't have the crayons or the time to explain this to you. That means that the foundation of your thinking is so different from mine. And yes, I think mine is better. That I don't have the time or the crayons to explain this to you. You have to decide whether the person has your crayons and your time. That's what I mean by that. But back to Emma, because I don't think that the stuff she said made me think about crayons and time. I don't. I think Emma Grede is one of the type of girls who has always been on the trajectory of what she's been on. And I'm not surprised that she is where she is and saying the shit she's saying. But I do think it's harmful for all of us to tell story number one, the incomplete story, to still be this big age that we are still having not uprooted and really delved into our liberation story or story number two. That's harmful. So yes, that's what I feel about the Emma Grede interview on KeKe Palmer. That's what I feel about a lot of the stuff that Emma Grede says. I also feel like we have to ration our rage in a way that makes sense for us and for whether or not somebody even talking to us, whether or not something even applies to us. Just because somebody talking about women or use the word women or say black women don't mean she's talking to you just because you're a black woman. Emma Grede, based on who she is, the stuff that come out of her mouth, and I don't know if it's up to us to be Captain Save a Hole. Emma Grede ain't reading all these comments. But it's really a moment for me I use these moments where I'm like, that hurts, child, she ain't talking to me, to reflect, just like I did now. And I'm like, oh, I think that got me annoyed is I'm just tired of people telling incomplete stories. I'm tired of a larger narrative of, even like I told you, Bob Johnson's wife and the way they frame that story. Nothing to her because I don't even think she wrote the story, but I'm saying, what else is in there? Like, how did Emma go from being a poor girl in London to how did you even meet the Kardashians? And not, oh, I happened to meet Kris Jenner somewhere, but how did you get into the room where Kris Jenner was? I want people to complicate the story more. How did you get to connect like with Bob Johnson's wife? So you moved back to Virginia because you lost a baby and your husband cheated on you and you had a divorce. How did you even get into a space to own a salamander? How did the name salamander come up? How did you meet people to help you build the salamander? Like, we got to complicate the narrative, honey, because I'm tired of story number one, especially from grown ass people at this big age, still telling, I grew up poor, my mama was a single mama, or I was raised by a single daddy, and baby, but I somehow got to Harvard. Girl. What I look like having a Spelman degree, but only tell. And what's funny is that I've had to check people who assumed I was a first generation college student at Spelman because I'm from Hollygrove and because I'm from the murder capital and because I have a thick accent and because I was not in Jack and Jill and all of these kind of things. And people's mouth drop when I say, no, I'm a third generation HBCU graduate. My neighborhood, Hollygrove, Miss Melba next door was a VP of a magazine. Miss Montgomery, who lived next door to her, was a high-powered attorney in one of the buildings, like One Shell Square downtown. Miss Palmer went to Dillard, I think. My mama went to Dillard. Miss Paulette around the corner, she drove the city buses. My Nanan went to Dillard and played Zeta Phi Beta. A separate conversation is how I will die on the hill that the hood is the most diverse place culturally when we talk about these kind of conversations. You find any and everything in the hood, child. From the poorest to the richest. From the least educated to the most educated. From the weirdo dope boy to the one, like, it's everybody and anybody could be from the hood. We ain't here to talk about the hood, though. My issue was the incomplete storytelling of Emma Grede and the incomplete storytelling on a larger scale, that when we just read stories, we just get so wrapped up into the emotion of the valiant and the person who like rose from the ashes. We don't ask ourselves how. It's not helpful to the little kids like me in the hood to just hear a story of somebody who rose up, because then you can't necessarily find real success just from having read stories of people who rose up. Because then you do things like I have to find myself not doing, is beat myself up because I haven't been able to figure out how to open the salamander resorts. And that's something I still wrestle with at 46 is, why am I where I am when I see all these people in this valiant... Sometimes these people leave out that their uncle was the VP of another resort. And here you are thinking that they where you at with no connections. Because I say all the time, all my mama could give me is a prayer and a supplication with Thanksgiving. But Trisha don't have nobody in her Rolodex to call and be like, yeah, da-da-da-da. But you comparing yourself to somebody that you think is equally as with equal little access as you have. Meanwhile, they have access. But you over here beating yourself up because you not where you think you should be, where they at, and really they leaving out a whole chunk of the story. Learned about that a lot going to Spelman College. Because Spelman is full of poverty stories of rich-ass girls or poor-ass girls who are oddly well-connected. A lot of people's moms was executive assistants to big wigs and came back home to the hood. But that singular connection of being an executive assistant is a lot of reasons why people parents. It's just a lot of reasons. Don't compare yourself to the person who actually has connections when you don't. That is something I'm working on. That's the video, Incomplete Truths and How They're Actually Harmful. So like, subscribe, comment. Let me know what you think. I'm the ignorant intellectual, the bridge between the hood and the ivory tower. Black brilliance, formal education, not required. See y'all next time on the video. Peace.